one of a few NATO member states bordering Russia, to discuss further military aid to Ukraine.
In today's talks, Mr. Zelensky will be supported by European leaders.
A breakthrough is happening in Europe. What has been considered impossible for decades is now becoming a reality. This time, it is not only Ukraine that is on the table, but the entire security order of Europe. Today, the capitals are abuzz with activity. Generals are holding extraordinary meetings, and governments are preparing the public. Because sending troops into the field is no longer a possibility, it is now in the planning stages. And this plan could be the largest military move the continent has seen since World War II. The scenario that Putin fears most is gradually becoming a reality. The Kremlin, which has been working for years to divide and weaken Europe, is now about to face a united force. Approximately 10 countries are ready to send troops to Ukraine if a peace agreement is signed. The French and British are leading the way, with others following suit. This is the clearest message Europe has ever sent to Moscow. You started the war, but from now on, we will set the rules of the game. If these troops land on Ukrainian soil, Europe will no longer be a passive spectator, but will once again become a military actor on the world stage. And the real question now is even more pressing. Will this step really make Europe safer, or will it drag the continent directly into a new front? In the third year of the war in Ukraine, information leaked from behind the scenes shook all the balances. About 10 countries are preparing to send troops to Ukraine along with a peace agreement. This is not just news. It is a development that will change Europe's security paradigm. Until now, Western support for Ukraine has been limited to weapons, financial aid, and intelligence sharing. Sending troops directly has always been considered a red line. NATO has repeatedly stated that there will be no NATO troops in Ukraine. But the picture has changed at this point. Because weapons alone are not enough. The idea that a physical presence on the ground is necessary is gaining strength. France and the UK are leading the coalition. Macron was one of the first leaders to mention this possibility, while London is Kiev's most staunch supporter. Poland, the Baltic states, Slovakia, and the Czech Republic are following suit. For these countries, the issue is not just solidarity, but national security. They believe that if Ukraine falls, they will be next. Western European allies such as Denmark, the Netherlands, and possibly Italy are also mentioned. Even if the list is not made public, the phrase 10 countries is significant in itself. This is no longer a small gesture, but a serious military presence. Moreover, the change in Washington is contributing to the acceleration of this process. Trump brought up sending troops to Ukraine as a guarantee of peace. European capitals are trying to turn this into an opportunity. Such a step could not have been taken without political approval from the US. Now the door has been opened. These troops will not be sent to the front lines. They will mainly monitor peace, ensure security, and protect reconstruction efforts. However, this makes no difference to Moscow. The presence of foreign troops on Ukrainian soil is a direct challenge to the Kremlin. In short, this plan is not only about supporting Ukraine, it is about Europe breaking with decades of security habits and preparing to defend its own future with its own soldiers. As soon as Europe's plan to send troops to Ukraine came up, the first question was, how many troops will there be and what will they do? Because the number will determine not only the military, but also the political message. The scenario that has emerged is not a war army to be sent to the front lines. We are not talking about a force that will directly attack Russian troops with tanks. The concept is more about monitoring peace, ensuring security, protecting humanitarian corridors, and supporting reconstruction. However, there is a critical point here. This mission is not passive. The troops that will be deployed will be armed, trained, and disciplined. Their presence alone will be enough to deter. Looking at past peacekeeping missions in Bosnia and Kosovo, we see troop numbers in the tens of thousands. Ukraine, however, is much larger in terms of both geography and population. Therefore, it is impossible to achieve effective deterrence with just a few thousand troops on the ground. If Europe truly wants to demonstrate resolve, it must deploy a force of 20,000 to 30,000 troops in the first phase. This is not just a symbolic gesture, it is a serious military presence. As for their mission, the most likely scenario is patrol duties along the ceasefire line. Foreign troops will be stationed in areas separating the front lines. This will have two consequences. The Ukrainian army will be able to catch its breath, and Russia will be deterred from launching a new offensive. Because engaging in direct combat with French, British, or Polish soldiers would be tantamount to suicide for Moscow. The second task is to protect critical infrastructure. If the peacekeeping force protects the power plants, water facilities, and transportation networks that Russia has targeted during the war, Ukraine's reconstruction will accelerate, and the Kremlin will lose targets that it can easily use for blackmail. The third task is the humanitarian dimension. International troops will be on the ground to ensure the safety of civilians, deliver aid supplies, and clear mines. This means that Europe will demonstrate its presence not only as a military power, but also as a humanitarian force. Logistically, the most likely scenario is that troops will enter Ukraine via Poland and Slovakia. This makes Warsaw and Bratislava key rear bases for the coalition. As for the chain of command, the only option is a unified structure. A fragmented command structure would lead to chaos. Most likely, a headquarters will be established in Warsaw or Kiev. The outcome is very clear. These troops will not be sent to the front lines to fight, but to deter. However, their mere presence will be enough to upset Moscow's calculations, because Putin will now be facing not only the Ukrainian army, but also European troops. Europe's plan to send troops to Ukraine is not just a threat to the Kremlin, but a direct nightmare, because this step collapses the narrative that Moscow has been trying to build for 3 years in a single move. Until now, Putin has tried to legitimize the war by saying, "We are fighting against NATO." But the reality was clear. Western soldiers were not on the ground. If this coalition enters the battlefield, Putin's long-standing claim will become a reality for the first time. The Kremlin's first reflex will be propaganda. Russian state media will run headlines for days saying, "The West has officially entered the war." The public will see that the war, presented as a special operation, has now turned into an international front. This will damage Putin's image of keeping the war under control. Militarily, the Kremlin faces a major dilemma. Directly attacking French or British soldiers would draw Russia into a hot war with NATO, a scenario that would be suicide for Moscow. Therefore, Putin will likely opt for indirect attacks, intensifying the bombing of Ukrainian cities, targeting energy infrastructure, and increasing pressure on the front lines. In other words, he will try to weaken Ukraine without directly harming Europeans. In addition, hybrid warfare methods will be employed. Cyber attacks in European capitals, attempts to sabotage energy lines, and intense disinformation campaigns on social media can be expected. The goal will be to create division within Europe and turn public opinion against this decision. The most dangerous card is still on the table: the nuclear threat. Putin has repeatedly hinted at tactical nuclear weapons. With the arrival of Western troops in Ukraine, these threats will be voiced more loudly. However, threats that are constantly repeated but never implemented will eventually erode the Kremlin's credibility. Another possibility is that Belarus will be brought more actively into the game. Moscow could conduct exercises via Minsk to exert pressure from the north and amass troops on the border. However, the fragility of the Lukashenko regime makes it unclear how sustainable this card is. The conclusion is clear. Europe's deployment of troops makes it impossible for Russia to play the game on its own terms. The Kremlin now faces not only Kiev, but a multinational European power. This is a fundamental shift that will fundamentally alter the nature of the war, because from this point on, every step Moscow takes will not only challenge Ukraine, but also Europe at the same time. On the other hand, Europe's plan to send troops to Ukraine will not be carried out under the NATO umbrella, because this would fuel Moscow's favorite propaganda: NATO is at war with us. Instead, the formula is a coalition of the willing. Not NATO, but NATO countries on the ground. The US line is very clear. American ground troops will not enter Ukraine, but Washington will be involved in air defense, intelligence, and air support.